Well, good afternoon. We're continuing on with the commentary on the book of Genesis, and we've reached chapter 16. The title for today's chapter is Sarai Gives Hagar to Abraham, and Ishmael is born. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name is Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold, now the Lord has restrained from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened unto the voice of Sarai. It was the tradition that if a wife was barren, then the husband could sleep with a maid of his wife, and the firstborn offspring of that union would take the name of the family and become the legitimate heir to the inheritance. But this was not the case. This was not to be the case with Abraham and Sarai. This child of this union could not be the heir because the nation of the Hebrews had to be a pure line from Abraham with no mixed blood from an Egyptian woman. Verse 3, And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar her maid the Egyptian after Abraham had dealt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So this took place 10 years after he started to live in Canaan, and she gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. Now we have a problem, because many translations say that Sarai gave Hagar to Abram to be his concubine, and that the firstborn would become the heir to Abram's inheritance, as if she was born through Sarai. But here in black and white, in my 150-year-old King James Bible, it clearly says, And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband, Abraham, to be his wife, not concubine. This means that the child is the firstborn of his second wife, which would make him the legal heir by birth. Pardon me. This is in fact what the Muslims argue, that Ishmael is the legal inheritor to Abraham's inheritance, including the land. They forgot to read further to God's further clarification, and the promise that the inheritance would be through the birth of a son from Sarai, the first wife of Abram, in chapter 21. So we're now only in chapter 16. If that were read further into the scriptures to chapter 21, it would have been made very clear. Anyway, let's go on with the chapter we're in. And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Now Hagar thought that she would become the favoured wife, because she will now be the wife of the firstborn child to Abram. And Sarai said unto Abram, My wrong be unto you. I have given my maid unto your bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and you. Sarai now asked that the Lord judge between her and Abraham for this action. And Abram said unto Sarai, Behold, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as it pleases you. And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. Abraham was very practical in his response. Hagar is your maid. Do with her as you see fit. This is not my problem. So Sarai dealt harshly with Hagar, and she fled out into the desert, still carrying her unborn child. Verse 7, And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way of Shur. Now in Scripture, whenever you see angel of the Lord with a capital A for angel, it means Jesus in his angelic form. Jesus came down from heaven in his angelic form, just as he did to speak to Moses from within the burning bush. He did that to speak to Hagar. What transpires in the next verses is important. Otherwise, Jesus would not have left heaven to deliver this message personally to Hagar. It's important. That's why Jesus came himself. And he said, Hagar, Saria, maid, where are you coming from, and where will you go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. Here Jesus asks her two questions, and Hagar answers truthfully. And it's a commandment in verse 9. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to your mistress, and submit yourself unto her hands. Now, this is further confirmation that it's Jesus talking. Notice the angel did not say, God tells me to tell you. God sends me to tell you. No. This is because the angel of the Lord has that authority to issue these commands himself. Verse 10 is a promise. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. In other translations, it says that the Lord promised that her child would be a great nation, one nation only. One nation. The descendants of Ishmael shall be one great nation. And we know that in 1900, when King Saud brought all the nomadic tribes of Arabia together, he formed one great nation, which is Saudi Arabia. And that is where the basis for Mecca and Medina is, which starts Islam. And that is lining up with what the future prophecies are about this child. Hagar will deliver. Verse 11. Again a promise, and the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, you are with child, and shall bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. Again, the response made by Hagar clearly indicates that the angel is all-knowing and has the authority to issue names to children in the Bible. Promise in verse 12, and he will be a wild man. His hands will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of his brethren. You only have to look at the descendants of Ishmael today. They are wild. They are rebellious. Their main attributes are hate and killing righteous people. And their concentrated desire is to wipe out their relatives, that is the Jews, from the other line of Abraham, through Sarai, Isaac and Jacob, renamed Israel. That's what the Muslims want to do. They want to get rid of that other half of the line of Abraham through Isaac and Jacob, so they can take all of the land for themselves. And that's why they cry out from the river to the sea. That's what they want to seize, the inheritance that they believe they should have got through the line of Ishmael. Verse 13, and she called the name of the Lord that spoke to her, Thou, Lord, seize me. For she said, Have I also looked after him that sees me? Wherefore the well was called Beer-lahai-rai, which means the well of him that lives and sees me. It is between Kadesh and Bered. And then in verse 15 is the fulfilled promise. And Hagar bare Abraham a son, and Abraham called his son's name, which Hagar bare Ishmael. Obviously, the encounter between Hagar and the angel of the Lord was reported to both Sarai and Abraham when she returned back to become submissive to Sarai, her master. And verse 16, and Abraham was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. And so we leave the chapter there, and we continue on with the promises of the renewed covenant in chapter 17.